All right, we're back again with another weird little project task that I want to try out before a greater project. And as the title states, that's going to be setting up and test firing this big block 413 Mopar engine and testing the transmission that'll be going behind it, which is right there, to see if everything is good before we go and put it in the old Dodge. Because I don't want to put all this garbage in the old Dodge and then find out that there's problems and then I have to extract all this stuff again. I'd rather go ahead and test this stuff right here on the ground and weed out all the bugs ahead of time. So as you can see, the trusty dusty tractor did its job once again, delivering our engine to our area right here where we're going to set it up for our test running platform. Already got a head start with a cheap disposable pallet underneath it to keep the pan somewhat off the ground, as well as create some extra support points to hold the thing upright. So next order of business is going to be to start looking at getting that transmission bolted up to this thing. Them things are heavy. Let me get started. We got our transmission bolted down. Torque converter is also bolted up, so that's all good. Another thing I also took a moment to put on was our starter, so that's all secured. The next order of business is putting the exhaust manifolds on. Now, I did have some studs in here from when there were headers on here, but trying to put headers on a B-body Chrysler is a pain in the ass, so I went back with the old school manifolds. But these studs that are on here didn't have the nuts for them. They were a finer tread and they were rusty anyway, so I had to remove them. That was also a pain in the ass, and because of it being a pain in the ass, I ended up breaking one of the studs off in the head, which required me to drill out the remnants of that stud using several different drill bits, working my way up till I got close to the diameter of the hole, then using a tap set to tap that hole back out, and obviously pay a close attention to make sure I don't drill into the water jacket or anything that would otherwise render this head a boat anchor. But we got it done. Holes tapped. We're ready to go ahead and install this hunk of iron on here. The other side actually went pretty good without breaking anything. So let's go ahead and get the exhaust on. With our exhaust manifolds in place, my next order of business is going to be our distributor. This is a HEI module equipped distributor, but it uses an external coil, so I'm going to have to mount the coil, wire the coil in with the distributor, and just do a little splicing so I can have just one wire feed that'll be going to a 12-volt power source, so I don't have any excess wires running across the engine for the ignition system. As for our wires, spark plug wires, I'm going to have to get a set of wires because the spark plug wires that I did dig up were not really long enough. So that's a minor inconvenience. But in the meantime, I'll get the coil and stuff on here and then start looking at some of the other aspects of getting this engine set up for a test firing. Stand by. We have our distributor and ignition coil in place. Coil is mounted to the stock location on the intake. I cut the positive wire on the wire harness for the distributor so I could splice an extra lead into it to feed the coil, as well as have our line for our 12-volt feed. And the negative side of that wire harness went to the negative side on the coil. So with all this, I still need just one 12-volt line feeding this whole works. As for our spark plug wiring situation, I'm not going to be able to buy a set of stock Mopar wiring for this setup because of that distributor right there. That cap is geared for HEI style plugs, terminals, and stock Mopar stuff does not use that type of hardware. So I'm going to have to buy raw wiring and terminals to just make my own wires, as I did with this stuff here that was used on the 318. So I'm going to go ahead and use some of these wires here for some of the shorter runs, and then I'll just make new wiring for any longer runs that I might need to do. So we'll be straight on the spark plug wiring side. Another thing I took a moment to do was wire up a starting circuit for our starter, and that incorporates this little automotive relay right here, as well as a couple of battery cables. We have our positive cable going straight to the starter, and we also have a line from the same terminal going to the automotive relay. So we'll take this, let me get my hands on it. This wire right here that's going to the automotive relay to energize the coil will be engaged by one of those push button starter switches, and one end of that switch will be hooked up to this while the other will be going to the positive on the battery. So when I engage that switch, it'll engage that relay, which in turn will engage the solenoid on that starter to crank this thing. I have a couple grounds already established, the one right there for the automotive relay, and then the battery cable is bolted down on top where the ignition coil was at. So we have all that ready to rock and roll. Took a moment to try to make everything as neat as possible, screwed down the relay and everything so this stuff isn't just bouncing around. So at this point, I'm going to have to buy some stuff because, well, there's a lot of crap I got to buy. Got to get some flanges for our exhaust so we can try to make some ends to hook up to the exhaust manifold. So when I do start this thing up, I don't have jet blasts just incinerating the starter and the wiring. Also have to get a thermostat and the gasket so I could get that in place, and get a upper radiator hose because, well, as you can see, we got our radiator sitting right there. To make things a little more normal, I'm just gonna stage our radiator, hook the hoses up to it, and fill the whole thing up with water as you would if it was in the car, and run it like that. So let me go and buy some crap. Stand by. All right, got our stuff for our spark plug wires. Took the liberty to do a couple of wires already, but we'll do one on camera just for the sake of showing what this entails. You'll end up with a roll of wire typically, but there's a little core in there. If you could see, get the camera right there. There's a little core wire inside this thick insulation that'll need to be exposed. You'll need one of these tools here for making spark plug wires. End up cutting this wire carefully, of course, getting around this insulation enough so to expose that core. Then give it a little twist up, fold that core over the insulation. Take our little end right here, and where the core is at, place that on top of that. You'll have the little teeth portion right here, and go ahead and this is my way of doing it to easily work the thing closed, but the whole idea is to get this thing closed up around the insulation so you could finish it off with a full crimp. Give it a good squeeze right there. And I still go around it just to ensure everything is closed together pretty good. And that'll be how it looks. You probably notice the core of the wire just a little bit exposed right there. Not much, but it's pinched between the terminal and the insulation. And then we have our boot. Sometimes you might have to put some conductive grease on here to help slide these boots on, but these are actually soft enough that I could work these things on here where I could get it seated. And don't know if we could see that through here, but there's the terminal end right there, ready to snap on. So, simple thing, really quick to do. You can make custom wires real easy. Just buy the raw materials and the tool and have at it. Go ahead and wrap this up. Alright, got all our wiring done. At first there were only 2 wires I had to do, but I did a 3rd wire so I could get a little bit more length in order to put them all in the little 4 count clip right there. So they're all hooked up. Another thing I took the liberty to do was fabricate a wood framework to support our radiator, where I attached 2x4s to the pallet and supported them with some bricks under there and put some 2x4s up right there in order to bolt our rad to it so it's nice and solid, and the spacing's about where it would be in the car, which also led me to hooking up the rad hose on the bottom. I'm still waiting for my thermostat so I could put that part together. The other thing I went ahead and fabricated were some flanges for our exhaust manifolds, because, well, the exhaust manifold, well, the flanges that would normally be used for this, a little pricey, the pipes and all that crap that is. So I just went and bought some generic flanges and welded up a short piece of pipe that I could couple up to these 2-inch couplings, which in turn will go to these elbows that'll be welded up to the rest of the exhaust system on the car. So with that, got our gaskets and everything. I could bolt all this trash together, and then the last thing, well, besides the thermostat, is the transmission lines. So let me get this garbage put on. Transmission lines installed. This is some bulk flexible, semi-flexible 1/4-inch metal line for making brake lines and the like. Also had to find some fittings, brass fittings, to go into the 1/8 MPT ports on the transmission and adapt to the flared fittings typically used on brake lines and oil lines. Same thing on the radiator side. Unfortunately, local auto parts stores don't stock a vast selection of different sizes that you would have normally seen on these old cars, because, well, a lot of the stuff is pretty much made to snap together on the newer cars, so no need to stock all this stuff. You'll have to know the sizes of whatever adapters and bushings and the like to be able to know what to order on Amazon or the like. So yeah, have fun trying to find some of this shit. But another thing I took the liberty of doing was putting a couple little welds on these couplings to hold our elbow pipes in place, so when this thing does start up, instead of having fire blasting all over the starter and everything, I'll just have fire coming out of the back of the pipes. So more than likely I'm going to be replacing some of this stuff with some regular elbows and, you know, try to neaten it up a little bit. But for right now, this is what we're working with. Then the next thing we're going to need to address is our carburetor, bolting that thing down. And because this thing is a spread bore intake, I had to put one of these adapters on there to put the square bore Edelbrock on there. I'll just have to hook that up to our mechanical fuel pump and also get a long enough line to go to a gas can, which obviously will be somewhat over there away from the exhaust manifold. So go ahead and get the rest of this trash done. Still waiting for my thermostat so I could wrap that up as well. And I'll need to get a battery, and we should be able to light this thing off then. I finally got my thermostat. This was a 160-degree thermostat, so I could make the engine run cooler than most would normally make it run because, well, this is a big engine and I'd rather it run a little cooler than run close to the borderline of being too hot. Got that. Our gasket's already glued down. Got to apply some more goop to this housing right here and then bolt this trash together. One of the things that's recommended to do before you fire up an engine new or sitting on the shelf for a year, or an old engine in a car that's been sitting for 20 years, whatever, is to prime the oil system. And most of these old V8s are pretty simple as far as their construction in order to allow you to do that. And basically the oil pump, well, for starters, on a big block Chrysler, the oil pump is actually externally mounted on the outside underneath the power steering pump. We'll get there in a minute. But and then it's driven by this little gear and shaft right here. This goes into the oil pump. This meshes with the camshaft, so the camshaft drives this piece, which drives the oil pump. And of course you got to pull your distributor out in order to remove that. And in order to prime your oil pump, you need to have a tool that has that same hexagonal spline to go into the oil pump body. They make tools commercially for that, but because I'm cheap, I just made a tool out of a piece of hexagonal spline that I don't remember where I got this from, but it fits into a 5/16 socket. So took an old extra 5/16 socket as well as a extension that's missing the little button in there, so that was garbage anyway, and welded all this trash together to make a priming tool. And then we just simply insert this thing into that hole, make sure it goes into the oil pump, and just use a simple impact driver or drill or whatever. Because of the rotation, this thing is counterclockwise. So let me get over to the other side here. I took the oil filter off right there to show where the oil pump, this whole body right here, that's the oil pump right there. Another cool thing about big block Chryslers is you don't have to pull the pan in order to change the oil pump out. But I wanted to first see if this thing was actually gonna build up pressure, and it actually did, because right there, making a horrendous mess, but it's a wonderful mess. So now I'll go ahead and put this oil filter back on and do the same thing again for a few moments so I could pump oil up through all the bearings and rods and valve train, all that crap. So at least when I do light this thing off, I'm not gonna shred its insides. So I'll go ahead and do that and get back with you. On Chrysler engines, to verify that you're getting oil to valve train, you're going to have to crank the engine over or otherwise rotate it to a certain point, because the camshaft bearings are set up where, as the camshaft rotates, it allows the ports on the oil system to be opened up to allow oil to bleed out into the cam bearings, and in turn also pass into the rest of the oil system, making its way up to the top. So if your engine is not in the right position as it's just sitting there, you could crank that oil pump as much as you want, you're not going to get oil anywhere. But once you rotate the engine around to the point where that oil passage is open to the rest of the oil system, it'll allow the oil to come up. That's what I had to do here in order to verify that I was getting oil on this side of the engine. I was getting it on the other side, but not here. So yeah, anybody messing with old Chrysler stuff that doesn't know this crap, here you go. Let me put all this crap back together. One other thing that I'm sure most people were thinking about is, how the heck am I going to secure this engine from shaking all over the place when it does start up? Because, well, it's not really secured. It's just resting on the pallet. And if this thing starts jumping and bobbing around, especially when I goose it, it might fall over. So that means I have to fabricate some kind of mounting setup. And the easiest way to do that is to utilize the existing engine mounts on the engine, and maybe just use a ratchet tie down around the transmission on the rear end there to hold it to the pallet. But the crude crap I came up with, utilizing more wood of course, started off on this side here. I put it's probably about a 3x3 cedar block that I had from the scrap underneath the pallet to strengthen this section up. Then I made this little thing out of some more cedar block and a piece of 2x4, where drilled a hole in the block right here to accommodate this nipple right here on the motor mount, so I could rest all that crap like that. And afterwards I'll go ahead and drive a deck screw with a fender washer through these holes to hold the motor mount to the cedar block, and then of course drive some more deck screws through both the end of this 2x4 through the pallet and into this 3x3 cedar block. So at least I'll have a fighting chance of keeping this thing from jumping all over the place. And of course the same thing will be done on the other side. So with that all said and done, let me screw all this garbage down, and then of course strap down the transmission and wrap things up before we actually try to light this thing off. All right. We have our crude engine mounting apparatus completed. All the blocks as shown before, secured in place with the deck screws and fender washers. The wood block down there being used for extra support. Then same thing on the other side. Duplicated the same setup with the blocks and the hole drilled through that block for the dimple on the motor mount and the fender washers, all that good crap. And then on the rear here, for the transmission, I have a ratchet tie down being used to hold the bell housing of the transmission in place via the hooks. And there's plenty of space right here, so this thing ain't coming in contact with the exhaust. The other thing I did was take the excess strap, route it around the side of the engine block, still away from the exhaust, and looped it through this alternator bracket right here and underneath the pallet over to the other side here and back up through this loop on the power steering pump and tied it all down. So I have some redundancy as far as helping to support this whole power plant from rocking side to side. So with all that said and done, other than filling our transmission up with a bunch of oil, we even have some gas right here and our fuel line with plenty of length. So we're really ready to rock and roll after I oil that transmission up. All right, we pretty much have everything ready to rock and roll. Threw a gallon of transmission oil in here to get this thing started, but won't be able to tell how much I really need to put in there until I get the thing running and circulating oil through the internals. But we have our gas can right there already set up. I took a moment to take the hose off of the carburetor and actually suck gas through the entire system and have a good taste of some petrol in the process before putting that hose back on there, so at least all the lines are primed with gas. So it shouldn't take much for the mechanical fuel pump to push more gas into the thing. Then got a can of brake clean to spray in here to help coerce this thing to pop off. Put a little bit of gas in the carburetor as well to get everything started. And near as I can tell, my timing should be almost spot on. We'll see. But got plenty of coolant in the rad. Everything else is set up too. We're gonna see if this crap actually does something. But the first thing I'm gonna need to do is put my headphones on, or earmuffs, or whatever the hell you want to call these things, because this thing's probably gonna be loud. Let me set my camera phone up. Stand by. The engine runs just fine. Smokes like a freight train, but that's mainly because of the 20-year-old valve cover gaskets that are on there. But another thing we're going to look at is the transmission. I'm probably not going to be able to be heard over the sound of the engine when I'm actually over it, cycling the throttle body on the transmission, so I'm just going to show you the doggone thing. So stand by. Let's walk back over here. I wouldn't even know if you could hear me or not, but right now it's in reverse. It's in reverse right now. Now we're in neutral. Now we're in first gear. Second gear is spinning up faster. Now we're in third gear. Well, actually, that's the other way around because this is the reverse manual valve body. So, yeah. But the main thing is the transmission works. I'm happy about that. The engine also works. I'm also happy about that. And so far, it looks like we're probably warmed up and everything, so our water pump is circulating like it's supposed to, and it's not puking up all over the place, so that's a good sign just as well. Let me back away from this thing so you can actually hear me better. But yeah, I'm gonna have to change the valve cover gaskets because, well, it leaks oil. So let me go ahead and shut this thing off a second, do a little observation and see if there's any crap that needs tightening up. Also need to check the transmission, see if it needs any more oil. Give me a minute. Yeah, we got plenty of oil in the transmission. the engine, which too is ready to rock and roll. Sounds pretty damn good as well. And that little fire action right there. Pretty awesome. Well, she's been running for a good while. If anything was going to happen temperature-wise by now, it would have happened, because we're clearly getting warm in there from the steam and the froth already boiling over from this rusty radiator. That water is definitely hot, but yeah, I think the engine's pretty good right now. The transmission's definitely good, and it's definitely building up oil pressure, obviously, because, well, it's puking oil out from the bad valve cover gasket, so all that stuff is good. So I'm gonna call this a success, an astounding success at that. I'm gonna shut this joker off, so, well, I can start breaking things back down, so we could actually put this thing in that thing. And that'll be on the next video. I'm gonna have to actually break everything down and put the transmission in here first, and then use the tractor to hoist that gigantic boat anchor over the car and mount everything together that way, because, well, can't really lift about 1,000 pounds of iron with the doggone tractor, or much of anything else for that matter, save a regular engine crane or maybe a gantry, but that's either here or there. We've done worse. So yeah, we're gonna conclude the video now. I'm gonna play around with the engine a little bit more, just because, well, big block V8 engines without exhaust on there are pretty cool, and they sound pretty cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and get off of here and continue with the work, because, well, the next installment is going to be getting this bad boy powered up. So as usual, like, subscribe, notifications, TikTok, all that good stuff. Stay tuned for more, because there is obviously going to be more. I will catch you later.